All right, we're going to wait a few seconds while everybody files in here. Okay, hi everybody. So as you know, in celebration of the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, the Ability Center has been hosting virtual information sessions on best practices from a city and regional level in order to make our area more disability friendly. So yesterday we had the webinar of best practices for implementing the ADA, which was a local legislator Title II training. Offered by Meg Conger, who is the Director of ADA Compliance for the city of Kansas City, Missouri. And so today is the second of a 2-webinar series. And today we have our local mayor panel where we are going to hear from city leaders about what they've done in their own communities to become more inclusive and disability friendly. So before I introduce our panelists, I just have some quick housekeeping items. There is an ADA seminar coming up in October. So if you are interested in attending, you can register via our website and you will receive emails with more information about the ADA seminar as it gets closer. We also have an ADA coordinator listserv, which I run. And we also, through that listserv, send out blogs on the ADA and about ADA compliance to local ADA coordinators and whoever wants to be on the listserv, just to give a little bit more information to our local ADA coordinators about compliance and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if you'd like to be signed up for the listserv, you can either sign up on our website or you can email me directly at kshelley@abilitycenter.org. Also, questions had to be submitted for this panel prior to the panel starting, but if you have questions, you can submit them via the Q&A box and we will make sure that they do get emailed to the respective mayors after the panel today. However, we will not be addressing any questions that are received during the panel on air today. Also, there is an ASL interpreter as well as a captioner should you need those accommodations. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Mayor Tom Mackin of Perrysburg. We have Mayor Quentin Babcock of Oak Harbor. And we have Mayor Craig Stough of Sylvania. Hello. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Katie Hunt-Thomas, who is going to be moderating today's event.
Thanks, Katie. Like Katie said, my name's Katie Hunt-Thomas. I'm the Disability Rights Attorney and Director of Advocacy here at the Ability Center, and we're really excited to have these pretty high-profile panelists here today. So thank you to all the mayors who agreed to come. And like Katie said, this webinar series is in the spirit of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is this Saturday. So I'm just going to ask our panelists first to go around the room and introduce themselves and what community they represent, maybe say a little bit about themselves. So go ahead, whoever wants to go first.
I usually defer to Craig. That's my strategy.
Defer to the elder. Okay.
Wise one.
I am Craig Stough, the mayor of Sylvania, and have been for quite a few years. But one item of note is that one of my first public boards was to join the board of the Ability Center, actually the Toledo Society for the Handicapped, 35 years ago. The director of the Ability Center, Dick Gundon, came to a local Chamber of Commerce meeting and was looking for people to join his board, and that was my first foray into public boards. And it's been an association I've kept up over the years. They do so much good work. They're located in Sylvania, but that's not why. They just do good work, and it's been great working with them.
I'm Tom Mackin, the mayor of Perrysburg. I've been mayor for 2 years, going on 3, but I was on city council 17 years before that. And as my day job, I am the Chief General Counsel for the Lucas Metropolitan Housing Authority. And one of the things I address on a normal basis is the issues regarding accessibility and 504 compliance. So this has kind of come to my attention as part of my legal practice, and has been something that's been important to me as a lawyer for LMHA. But when I got on as mayor of Perrysburg, this is something I thought was important to the community. So I appreciate having the opportunity today. And I apologize for talking fast. Sorry.
I'm Quentin Babcock. I'm the mayor of Oak Harbor, and I've been mayor, so I'm going on 2 years now as mayor, and I was on council for 3 years before that. And I have an education at the University of Toledo and a bachelor's degree in disability studies. And so that was sort of a program that, if you're familiar with the Ability Center, you know they're a very strong partner in that program. And so it's really great how much they support disability studies at the University of Toledo. And so I sort of bring that education with me to the mayor's office. And I think kind of a lot about, and maybe I'll touch on it later, how important it is that you, of course, are in full compliance with the ADA to the maximum, the most generous extent possible, and not, trying to work around it, just sort of to kind of comply. But also think about how in the work I do at Oak Harbor, we go beyond compliance, and we sort of think really holistically about how we make sure that the town is inclusive for everyone, with respect to all abilities.
Great, thanks to the three of you. I know the Ability Center has a long history with working with each of your communities, so thanks for that. I am going to give each of you 3 minutes to talk about an experience that you've had with accessibility in your own community. So we'll go around the room, and I guess I will pick on Mayor Babcock first.
Yeah, so I think I was really lucky coming into the village. We have a village administrator who is very aware of accessibility issues and is interested in supporting that administratively and operationally to the maximum extent sort of possible. And so I think we're really lucky that now that when we're looking aspirationally, when we look at major improvements that are made, that we really have an organization in terms of our staff members to support that. So for example, we're doing a big infrastructure project right now, and when you tear up we're doing a street reconstruction, you tear up your entire street, you have to put new sidewalks in, and the decision can be made, how do we want to comply with those sidewalks? Well, you can sort of, I'm not an expert, this is, I'm sure, Katie's field, not mine, but you have to have sidewalks that are, say, a certain amount of feet wide, or you can go narrower as long as you have a pass through every so many feet. And so that, sort of, if there were two people using a wheelchair, they could ostensibly pass around each other. And sort of that doesn't, I don't think that seems like a good idea. We should make sure that our sidewalks are sort of actually accessible and not sort of make this workaround. And then everyone sort of thought, yeah, that makes sense. But I think it's really important in my work with the village that we are sort of aspirational in terms of how big we can make accessibility in Oak Harbor, and we're systematic. And when we do all our planning, we make sure we're systematically include accessibility concerns and awareness with what we're doing. And that we also sort of, what I think is really important, I would describe my family as a disabled family, and that we have family members with accessibility needs. And I think what's really important is having a culture of flexibility within your organization that allows you to accommodate people as needed. Because ultimately, we can build really accessible infrastructure and make things accessible for everybody. But I would hazard to say that there'll always be scenarios when we can sort of accommodate better on a ad hoc basis. So for example, I helped, and this is of course not a high impact scenario, but I was out and I was going to help a woman in our community move a dishwasher up a flight of stairs. And because she was chronically ill, she wasn't able to do that herself, and she didn't have any family members that were able to help her do that. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll come and help you. And sort of our police department was on the way. So I stopped by and said, hey, you're doing anything right now? Can you come help me move a dishwasher? And so our police officer, of course, hopped along with me. We drove over to her house and I said, hey, I brought a police officer along. Is that all right? Yeah, of course. And we moved this dishwasher up the flight of stairs for her. And so, of course, I don't advertise our police officers as, private movers, but when the opportunity makes sense, it's really good as a government organization to offer that flexibility and empower your employees to do that. Because in government, as everyone watching is probably aware, there's so many regulations. The culture is very much comply with the regulations so you don't get sued and you lose all your taxpayer money in some lawsuit. So I think really that flexibility is really important. And that's sort of how I vision what we do in Oak Harbor.
Great, thank you. And Mayor Stough?
Thank you. We do work in Sylvania for accessibility as well, and there's a couple of projects I'd like to tell you about. One is our river trail, which we built in 2 phases. A little over a year ago, we opened up the 2nd phase. And there was never any question in our minds that we would make that accessible. And in the case of a trail like that, especially if it's going to have bikes on it, we made it 12 feet wide. We made all the ramps, the proper grades, and we have on and off locations, we think, in friendly places. It is a community asset. In the past, a lot of people's waterfronts were not accessible to anybody. In Sylvania, there was a bulk oil storage facility, and there are industrial areas in a lot of communities. So right now, sometimes those are available for river paths or river trails. And we were able to go out and get public funding. And of course, the public funding requires we meet the ADA legislation, but we try to exceed that. We try to think it through and say what really makes it easier and more welcoming for all people. And right along our river trail, we have a great big new apartment complex going into Sylvania. It's called the Somo Flats Apartments. There's going to be 206 apartments there. And we were able to work with the developer that it's a $30 million development. And we went to him, and the architect was from out of town. He's from Indianapolis. And we went to him and said, here in Sylvania, we like to take plans to the Ability Center, let them review them, and have input in them as well. In this case, the developer responded very positively. They made some changes to the accessible units, but they also added accessible units so that it's going to be a welcoming facility in town as well. I didn't get to mention earlier, by profession, I'm an architect, and I make my living being an architect. I have worked with ADA regulations from the very beginning, and you can either embrace them and understand them and make them work well, or you can fight them. And at the beginning, a lot of people fought them. In Sylvania, we try to embrace them and incorporate them into all the improvements in town. I think it's important for our citizens, but for our guests as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate that. I remember that. I remember that project, and we were happy to help out, and happy that you reached out to us for assistance. So thank you. And Mayor Mackin.
Thank you. First, I want to jump and piggyback on what the other mayors have said, that with regards to accessibility, there are certainly lots of regulations and compliance requirements that all the municipalities do when they're doing a project or anything along those lines. That's part of the factor of making those improvements. You want to make sure you're in compliance and doing that. But they both took the attitude, and that's what we're bringing to the city of Perrysburg, is that it's not just compliance, it's attitude of welcoming and incorporating those what needs to be done to make it a community that is accessible. And that's really the core. It's a holistic approach, as Mayor Babcock said. And I think it also requires some proactive measures, like Mayor Stough said. And that's what we're doing in the city of Perrysburg. As part of when I became mayor, that was something we wanted to make Perrysburg a community that's welcome to all those. We think that's good for economic sense, that people can come and shop and participate in things downtown or uptown Perrysburg, however you want to call it, where they can get into stores and those kind of things and are free to walk around and go to our parks and those matters. So as part of that, we did meet with the Ability Center, and I think that meeting actually struck a chord in me, because it was a rainy day and the city of Perrysburg's municipal building has had some improvements to try and comply with the ADA. But when they got to the meeting, we had the meeting, they couldn't use the ramp that was designed to allow someone who was in a wheelchair to get in. So then that individual had to go back out into the rain, outside our building and then come in through a different door. She handled it with grace and dignity, but that just kind of strikes the point that those micro indiscretions, those little minor things that aren't minor because they impact their quality of life every single day. So that struck home to me as being just something we need to be mindful of when we move forward with certain projects. And we're currently having in the city's budget to work on making Uptown Perrysburg more ADA compliant so that it's more accessible to those who come to our farmers market or our Harrison Rally Day or those kind of events. Once the pandemic kind of settles down and we go back to those events, that people can come to downtown Perrysburg and shop and go to places. So it's an approach that requires people to be proactive and just mindful of how do we make somebody feel a part of the community. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, so I was also there that day when the other member of our staff was unable to get into the Perrysburg Municipal Building, and we had to go out back into the rain and go around. And so thank you for, recognizing that as an issue and taking steps to try and remedy that.
So I would just quickly add, I should have added time. In addition to the steps that we're doing to improve accessibility in Uptown Perrysburg, we're also very actively pursuing making access to City Hall more accessible, because that's a critical function of every community. Every resident of the community should have an opportunity to come before council, to come before the mayor and speak. And we City of Perrysburg certainly does not live in a glass house. So one of the first things we're going to do is make some improvements to City Hall.
And I certainly appreciate that. That was great from all three of you. So thank you for your attitude towards accessibility and the steps that you've been taking in your own communities. The second question that we had was to go around and discuss the largest challenge that you've had facing, increasing the accessibility of your community. And think about this as if you were, speaking to other communities that are trying to do some similar projects. Mayor Stough, would you like to begin?
Got my microphone back on. Our biggest challenge is one that's still in the future of us. Tom brought up his downtown area and getting into stores. Our main downtown block was rebuilt in the mid-1980s, where they took out the old sidewalks and put in pavers. Also got rid of all the overhead wires and poles that were there and closed off truck traffic to it. But back in the 80s, accessibility wasn't on the table like it is now. And we still face problems in some of our downtown stores, in that these are dating back 100 years or so, and some of them still have steps up into their floor levels. And as we address the condition of the downtown sidewalks, we're going to have to take that into account as well. There is a fairly steep slope from the finished floor line of some of those stores down to the curb line, especially if we take the step out. So we are looking at those issues, and it's going to be a very difficult challenge facing us in the future. How do we address that? It will be an expensive challenge to do it, but we're going to build it into the budget and try and solve those problems as we move ahead. It's going to cost us, I think, a couple of $1 million to solve those issues downtown. But it's on the master plan to get it done. As more and more of the community is accessible near the downtown, we need to solve those issues as well. You cannot ask somebody to go around to the back of the building and come in a back door because that one is flush and the main door at the front that everybody else uses is not. So for those people that do not have an assistant that can help prop up the wheelchair or otherwise make their legs work to go up that step, we need to solve that in the future. We've addressed a few of them, but we have more to go. We may look out to the Ability Center for help in that in the future. When the pandemic's over and our city finances are a little sounder, we're going to take that one on. Thank you.
Yeah, and we are engaging in a project with Historic Downtowns, partly because of our collaboration with the city of Perrysburg. but also because that's a major issue for folks with disabilities, especially in Northwest Ohio, where a lot of the buildings are old. So we would love to partner with you on that. Mayor Mackin, sorry, would you like to go next?
I would, again, piggyback on what Mayor Stough said. We're in a similar position. Our improvements to Uptown Perrysburg were made prior to really considering the ADA as part of that. There were some improvements done, but really the accessibility into some of the storefronts is the immediate issue, and we have started the planning process of that, and that's been put into the budget. And that also addresses the issue of the physical part of that. Another roadblock is just having store owners and the community understand the value of spending those tax dollars to make the community more accessible. There's just some uneasiness with some people as to why do we have to do this? Or I don't understand, what does this mean? How is this going to impact my small business? Because in a small local shop that's locally owned, and those are very small margins, and is it going to block entry for how long? Those kind of things. So we started right from the start to involve local businesses as part of that process, because we wanted to make sure they understood the value to them as to why this improvements would help their businesses. There were several people who have come and spoken to us that have said, I love coming to the farmer's market every Thursday night in Perrysburg, but I can't get into X store. I would shop at X store. I look at it. I think I'd like to go inside, but I can't get in without two people helping lift my wheelchair. So that's how those are the stories we need to convey and get people to the table so they appreciate the importance of that just to local business, but also the notion that we are a welcoming, accessible community. And we think that would actually attract other people to come into town, and just another reason to say why Perrysburg is a great place to live. So there's some mindset issues that I think we still have to overcome, but that's part of the dialogue of listening to concerns and then explaining the value. Because I think once people see how it impacts, how those what they would view as a minor inconvenience is actually a real barrier. And when we have those discussions, most people are willing to say, hey, yeah, sure, I want to be part of that. But that's something that we're dealing with, and we think that that's just part of the normal process.
Very interesting. All right, Mayor Babcock.
Yeah, I think, as is typical when I go to a meeting with a bunch of mayors, we sort of all have the same style of problems, and this is exactly it. In Oak Harbor, likewise, we're looking at our downtown, and we're looking at the riverfront in these planning stages and how we look forward to how we can invest in those areas to make them accessible. But I think, what's really driving that to me, how I read the situation, is we've had 30 years of the ADA where whenever we make a sidewalk improvement, we have to make that curb cut. We have to make these ways of getting around accessible. But that was all within the Village of Oak Harbor, for example's control. And as long as I convinced, even to do something proactive, all I have to do is convince, my 6 people on village council to say, hey, this is kind of a good idea. It's not too much money, and we can make this improvement, make this curb cut, so to speak, to do this proactively so it's accessible for everybody. And that's not always easy, but it's doable. And now I think now that we generally have our accessible sidewalks, where did the sidewalks go? They go to our small businesses in our downtown, and they go to our riverfront and our other areas that we do recreation and hang out outside. And now we're looking at those places and saying, well, hey, wait a minute, people can get here, but can they go inside? Can they really enjoy the space? And likewise, now we have to begin this, I think, new stage of collaboration where we work with small businesses, work with property owners, work with whoever might be involved in managing our public spaces. And we have to build those narratives together that allow us to succeed in saying, yeah, we're on the same page. We get why this is an issue, and what is a feasible and doable plan to make our shops accessible, make our riverfronts accessible, make our parks usable for the widest variety of people possible. And so I think that's a challenge a lot of municipalities are facing right now.
Great, thank you for all of you for that. Our next question is to describe some of the future goals that your community has for accessibility and for increasing accessibility. Mayor Mackin, would you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I've touched on them a little bit. There's the overall, any new project that we are working on, we are including making sure that it is compliance with the ADA, and so accessibility is a component of that. One of the things that we also have been working on is making sure that there's more connectivity through multi-use paths, so that people can get from point A to point B in a different alternative use than a vehicle. And we've really been working on trying to make the riverfront more accessible with multi-use paths and other things that are ADA compliant. And since we've made improvements to Riverside Park, it's used now on a regular basis, and we want to just continue that and make sure that there's some connectivity there. As part of that, we're doing two important projects that we had passed in the budget for this year. One is the redevelopment or redesign of City Hall, so that is more accessible and more easily available to someone with a disability. And that includes not just being able to get into the meeting, but participating in a council meeting or a council committee meeting regarding microphones and visibility issues and those kind of things. So that's all part of the holistic approach to making sure that our own house is in order before we ask others to come into compliance. As part of that, we're also spend a lot of money having the budget for the development of plans to improve access to Uptown Perrysburg. That was approved, and we've started some of the initial phases of designs for that. It's very important to the community, and the community has said repeatedly we want to make sure we keep that charm of Uptown Perrysburg, the historic feel. We think that we can do that. We've seen some designs from Savannah and Naperville and some other places with communities that have older buildings that are still accessible. So we're working on that. We think that that's something we hope to accomplish in the next year or two, and we think that that will be a real addition to the community.
Great. Mayor Babcock?
Yeah, likewise, we've been working with the Ability Center to evaluate our downtown buildings and sort of follow, at least fairly closely, I think, in Perrysburg's footsteps in terms of identifying, in terms of doing the planning stages, identifying all the issues, and hopefully working together collaboratively on a plan to address those. So we're in the, again, working with the Ability Center on the planning stages of that to try to make that happen. And also, I think this is part of both sort of building a culture as well as actually building an individual project. We've been working for the past year, which has kind of got thrown in the loop due to coronavirus, but we've been working in the past year to develop support, I'd say document support and get funding for a riverfront project to redo our riverfront, which through a public-private partnership that would enable us to make it accessible. And when I talk about this project, of course, I talk about economic development and how it's going to help attract people to our downtown and help our small businesses thrive and those sorts of talking points. But a big way that I sell this is that this is going to make our riverfront accessible. This is a place that people use already. This is where we gather for, our Apple Festival, our fireworks, our, all of these important community events. And right now, a lot of it isn't accessible for someone who uses a wheelchair or a mobility device, or even an older adult or anyone who oftentimes doesn't excel at walking on even ground. And so if we make that area accessible, this allows us to invite everyone into this space. And so I think this is, in particular, that's a future goal, to make this space accessible. But also I think the work that we're sort of doing in the meantime is, getting out there and saying, hey, look, this is a value that Oak Harbor stands for, and we want to make our spaces accessible. And that, I think, as everyone's alluded to, making that really solid and so everyone knows, in Oak Harbor, they're going to do, they're going to work their hardest to try to make things accessible, I think is really important. And that's, I'd like, in the future, I'd like people, when they visit Oak Harbor, they know, okay, well, they're really working their hardest to make it accessible for us. So I think that's a really big goal.
Thank you. And Mayor Stough?
We talked about our river trail it had to face challenges of grade separations and grade differences to go under US 23. But like many of the roads in Sylvania, it goes east and west. Our next challenge is to try and create a multi-use path to link communities north and south in Sylvania. US 23 is a barrier going east and west, but 10 Mile Creek is the barrier if we want to do something going north and south. We are working on different possibilities of connecting Lord's University with the downtown. But 10 Mile Creek is a big barrier there. There are big grades going down to that. And we had for years thought we would use the old railroad right-of-way and the 150-year-old railroad trestle that crosses 10 Mile Creek. That's part of the oldest railroad line west of the Alleghenies. But it's staying strong. It's continuing to serve a granary north of town. Doesn't look like we're going to be able to count on using that right-of-way or that bridge. The university would like to connect their students and their campus with our downtown, but we face two challenges that we are working with them as well to cross the railroad track safely and to cross 10 Mile Creek safely. But you can't just put in a trail going east and west to interconnect your communities without putting one north and south. So that's our next challenge. And it's a difficult challenge. The Sisters of St. Francis are a great asset to our community. They're working with us, but part of that campus is still sequestered. We cannot pass through one of the routes that would make it easier. There's an unofficial route that crosses the railroad tracks behind St. Joseph Catholic Church in town, but we cannot improve that. So we are looking for other avenues, and both ends want to get it done. So that's our biggest challenge now.
That sounds like that would be a lot of work, but also a wonderful addition to the community. So we look forward to hearing more about that. Final question, that we have our final pre-prepared question, and then after that we did have a few questions that were submitted ahead of time via the form on our website from people in the audience, and I'll be putting those to individual mayors. So the final question is, what recommendations that would you have for another local government that's trying to increase the accessibility of their community? The Ability Center's challenge this year has been to make us the most disability-friendly community in the country. You know, each of you has taken some steps to increase accessibility. What would you recommend for other communities that are trying to do the same thing? And Mayor Stough, would you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. With any design project, with any improvement, you got to get all your goals in at the front end and address it from the front end. Accessibility has to be a goal at the beginning of the project. If you try to build it in later and design it in later, that doesn't work. A lot of projects, especially the ones that include government money, that's just a obligation that they try to address before they submit the plans. My recommendation is to put that on your must-do list right from the beginning. Have a design that will work for those solutions, not just one that you can force to make work, but one that actually works well. And the Ability Center has the ability to review your plans and give you some guidance right from the beginning. Early on, the Ability Center served as a plan review for government buildings. I remember doing projects at the University of Toledo and other government buildings, and the Ability Center would get back to it. And some of the architects were just flabbergasted. How can I incorporate this into my project now? Well, you should have done it from the front end. That's how. And that's my recommendation. Put it as a goal at the top of your list, incorporate it into the basic design, and it'll all work out, and it won't cost you that much more money to do.
That's some great advice. All right, Mayor Babcock, would you want to go next?
I would say two things, and one is definitely make sure you have the expertise you need, and whether, you know, in the Toledo area, bring on the Ability Center probably. If you're somewhere else, an independent living center, or even a consultant if you have to. I'd really make sure when you're engaged, as Mayor Stough sort of indicated, when you're engaged in a project where you're spending all this money and really accessibility needs to be considered on the front end, make sure you have that expertise so it is adequately considered. And then even again, beyond sort of just meeting the ADA requirements. And my second thing that we haven't touched on yet that I think is important to touch on is to make sure that you're considering your digital landscape as a municipality when you're thinking about accessibility, whether that's your social media pages or your website. There's a lot of things going on there that you may not be thinking about. Like if you have PDFs on your website, are those PDFs accessible? Which is easy to do once you do it. Likewise, do you have image descriptions on your photos on your social media pages so that someone using a screen reader can read them? That's something, again, that isn't hard to do, but if you don't think about it, then any of your residents or any interested members of the public who, especially this comes up with vision impairments, they may not be able to access these important public documents or your important public announcements. And so that's something I'd really say, make sure you don't overlook that. Obviously, we talk about the physical infrastructure because that's kind of more exciting, but
Thank you. And I'm glad you brought that up. Aside from physical accessibility, the ADA definitely covers web accessibility, effective communication, other non-discrimination provisions. Service dogs is a question we get a lot of questions about. Web accessibility is definitely important right now with everything being online with COVID as well. So thank you.
yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, yeah. And Mayor Mackin?
Thank you. And actually, this is a perfect example of mayors don't have time to reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to jump on two of the things that both of the other colleagues have talked about. First, that make sure that that's something that's talked about right from the get-go with any developers. Accessibility has to be talked about with anybody bringing a project into the city of Perrysburg through our planning and zoning office or through any of the projects that we ourselves are doing as a city. Regarding web access, and that is really something that is the forefront. That's an excellent point, and we at City of Perrysburg is upgrading and improving its web page. And as a lawyer for the Housing Authority, I'm very aware of we have had a number of issues of concern regarding people having accessibility to documents and being able to apply online and those kind of things. So we are also in the process of updating our web page so that PDFs, which cannot be read by somebody with visually impaired or having some other disability. So those are things you have to be mindful of. And this goes to the whole notion of holistically, are you being accessible to the community and everyone in the community? So that's an excellent point that Mayor Babcock brought up, and it is a real issue that I think as communities we need to get out in front of, because that's certainly a sign that we are a community that's mindful of, we want to be available to everyone, and everyone needs to have access to the information provided to the community. I would just add one last point that isn't new, and I know all of my colleagues are very aware of this. In addition to the Ability Center in Northwest Ohio, you want to be a part of and work with TMACOG to get resources that can help you fund some of these projects, and also get some expertise and information that will allow your community to move forward with these in the proper way, making sure you check all the boxes and get the steps to get resources that are available specifically for accessibility type issues. I know that Mayor Stough's been hugely involved in TMACOG, and I've been involved for a long time. It is a real resource both to get information and to talk to colleagues and to get the ideas out so you can find solutions in a collaborative manner between different agencies and departments, both at the local and state and federal level, all three of those. So I would recommend that as well as something that a community should do, and community leaders should participate in, because it's a real added value to anything you're trying to do.
Great, thank you. And then I would also note the Ability Center also works with Team McCog, and they do a very nice job of incorporating accessibility and advice on compliance with the ADA for local governments. So I would echo that recommendation. I'm going to go to the individual questions that were submitted. And like I said, there was actually one per mayor, which worked out just perfectly. Let's see. This first one is for Mayor Babcock from Gina Miller. Mayor Babcock, Gina says, in hopes that Oak Harbor's River Walk will come to life, will there be plans to make it handicapped accessible? I can see how it may be difficult to traverse. Thank you. And I know you've talked about that just a little bit, but if you want to talk a little bit more about that project for the person who wrote in, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. And like I said, we're really looking at that. And if you look at now, the existing sort of riverfront improvement where we have a hand-powered boat launch and a river overlook, all of those have been made to be accessible for wheelchair users and sort of to minimize, you can take the longer route around and minimize the incline you're walking on if an incline's a problem. So we're definitely considering how do we work on the riverfront to make that accessible to the most amount of people possible. And of course, right now, the challenge is always funding. So definitely, we're totally looking at, again, and sort of, if we get solid plans together, I hope to really just shop it out to say, okay, are there any above and beyond the ADA requirement ideas so that we can include to make this really an accessible place? Because even, for example, I've seen riverfronts that are really cool and they have amphitheaters, but how these, which is sort of part of the long-term plan for the riverfront, but these amphitheaters are sort of structured in such a way that it's absolutely impossible to have a wheelchair navigate. So I always think when I look at that, wow, we can do better. So definitely, and I really look forward to maximizing that accessibility when that project comes to fruition.
Great. It's so wonderful to hear each of you talking about accessibility projects in your community. The next question is for Mayor Mackin from Susan Berry. Is there any thought being given to allowing more time for people to safely cross the street, especially at the intersection of East Front and Louisiana? Do you have an answer for Ms. Berry?
That is a good question. Before I answer that, I'm going to just point out that we just redid our riverfront. And one of the things that a lot of people said was, why are you putting in so much concrete to make it accessible from the top near the front street all the way down to the river? And some people really questioned it. But if you go down on any given day, you will see people who would not otherwise have access to the lower part of that park using that ramp. It really is one of those, if you build it, people will come, and it demonstrates the value to that every single day. Since my gym was closed and in March, I've started walking around the community much more on a regular basis, and people, every time I walk by or walk through Riverside Park, people are using that ramp to access down to the river. So I think that's just an example of people are concerned when they see it about costs and some other things, but it really justifies itself, and you don't have to explain it other than just go watch. Regarding the question, I agree that sometimes it appears that the light changes from walk to do not walk within a second of it starting to flash, especially at Louisiana and Front Street in Uptown Perrysburg. I'm going to pass that on to the engineer and the city administration to look at. There are some issues. I know that is a state route, and we have certain restrictions and requirements regarding what we can do at a state route regarding the timing of lights, because the timing of the crosswalk is in conjunction with that. But that's something we can look at, because I totally agree. It seems like it says don't walk or flashes as soon as you start to enter the intersection. So I completely understand your question, and I'm going to follow up with our team. I'm not sure there's a lot we can do because the light is controlled by the state, but we certainly can investigate, because I certainly understand what you're talking about there.
All right, and then we have one more. This one was for Mayor Stough from Becky Opperman. Any plans to finish the sidewalk on Monroe between Nantucket and Talmadge to make it accessible? Are there any plans about ensuring that Sylvania can clear the sidewalks when it snows?
Those are good questions. The first one about the sidewalk along Monroe Street. Decades ago, the Ability Center building was not accessible along Monroe Street. And Lucas County worked with the city of Sylvania, and we got ODOT money to build accessible sidewalks on both sides of Monroe Street. And then another project we did, Alexis. Those projects have been in place for a long time, but they stop at the city limits. The part of Monroe Street you're inquiring about, Nantucket to Talmadge, some of that's in Sylvania Township, some of that's in the city of Toledo. And that's it. It's also a state highway, that's State Route 51. Sidewalks are not encouraged in Sylvania Township. The township trustees don't like the issue of making residents clear them, but I'm surprised that sidewalks weren't incorporated along there. The north side of Monroe Street is in the city of Toledo. The south side is mostly in Sylvania Township. I would recommend talking to the Lucas County engineer about that project. But it's not when it's outside of my jurisdiction, so I can't help you with it other than to tell you in the past, we were able to get state funding to help us through ODOT to build those sidewalks. Second part of your question was clearing the snow off of the sidewalks, and that is a challenge. Along Monroe Street, which has gotten wider over the years, the sidewalk keeps getting closer, the road keeps getting closer to the sidewalk. And so when the snow plows come along and throw the snow off to the side, sometimes it covers up the sidewalks. It is technically the responsibility of the property owners to remove that snow, and many do. Toledo Memorial Park will get out there and they have the equipment necessary to get the piled up snow off of the sidewalk. And some of the owners will as well. And the city gets out there, we clear it off the city property or the bridges, the bridge over US 23, we clear it on that vacant land that goes around towards the Burger King. And any intersections we try to take care of as well. But sometimes it's really hard to get every property owner out there to clear it. And if everybody doesn't do it, you can't get from here to there. The city receives complaints about that. I guess that's the most straightforward thing to do, is if you become aware of a piece of sidewalk that's not getting cleared in a timely way, let the city know. We send out a zoning administrator and he talks to the residents or the property owners. You can also talk to the property owner. If it's by chance a store or something, tell them, well, if they don't clear their sidewalk, you can't get there to do business with them. Everybody's supposed to do it in every neighborhood. We get pretty good compliance, but pretty good doesn't clear all the sidewalks. So if you have a particular property that's in your way, call us up. We have a gentleman that'll go out and he will work with them to get it done.
Great. Yeah, I would say snow removal is another big issue that we hear. As we have three of our local mayors in the room everywhere. It's very difficult for folks who use mobility aids to get down the sidewalk, especially if they don't drive and use public transit when there's snow. So I would love to have, in the past we've had snow removal summits. I would love to have further conversations about maybe ways to improve that process everywhere. So we have a few minutes left. I'm gonna just talk briefly about a push that the Ability Center is doing in honor of the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and our push to make Northwest Ohio the most accessible or the most disability friendly community in the country, to get all of our local governments to take a pledge to be a disability friendly community. And so I'm just going to share, we have a web page that any local governments either present or listening can just sign the pledge. And then our marketing our marketing person will work with you to create a nice disability-friendly graphic that can be shared online. I know several of the communities here have already done that. So just to let people who are watching know what we're doing, I'm going to share my screen. And this is the Ability Center disability friendly pledge page in honor, as I said, of the Americans with Disabilities Act 30th anniversary, ADA 30. So we're just asking anybody in our community to hop on and pledge to accept, welcome, understand, respect, speak directly to the person they're speaking with, ask, involve, educate, and support folks with disabilities in their community. Anybody can sign our ADA 30 pledge just by going on the website and filling it out. For our local governments, like I said, several who are participating here today, a nice little graphic will pop up for you that you can then share on your Facebook page in honor of the 30th anniversary of the ADA. The 30th anniversary is actually Saturday, July 26th. So our aim is to get these out this and next week. And I appreciate City of Perrysburg was the first to do it, which is why they've popped up here, but they're certainly not the only one. So this is just an example of the graphic that you can share. So I wanted to do a little bit of a plug for that, and I appreciate that our mayors here have agreed to participate in that. But for anybody who's watching, I would also invite you to do the same. So before we go, in the time remaining, I'm just going to open the floor to the three of you to give last remarks, and then we'll close up. And again, thanks to everybody for agreeing to be here and participate and talk about how to be a more disability-friendly community. I'm just going to let people volunteer on how to go first on the last closing remarks.
I can go ahead on that one. The way I try to look at it is that I was elected to be everybody's mayor in Sylvania, not just the movers and the shakers, or not just the people that are active in a particular neighborhood or like recreation or something like that. In fact, when I've been asked to give talks at the Northwest Ohio Mayors and Managers Associations or do a prayer, I always remind myself and the mayors that it's our jobs to protect the weakest among us and those that need the most help, not just the ones that are the strongest and can get in your way. So I encourage all elected officials to remember that you're everybody's mayor or everybody's elected official, not just those that offer you support or can cause you trouble. You have to protect the weak and help the poor. And not that people with disabilities are, but we can give the help where they need it so they have an equal chance, just like everybody else. So that's my guidance on that.
I would echo that and add that one of the things that makes a community and all the communities here, you heard the mayors talk about bringing people together. That's what I think a good mayor and a good city leadership does. It makes people feel like they're a part of the community, that they can be engaged and raise issues when they need to, and that they also can be proud of their community because it's welcoming and accessibility and is very much a part of that. And that's going to change in the 21st century, as we've talked a little bit about accessibility through the internet and through technology. And that's something I think all of us agree on and work every day to make sure that our community is accessible and welcoming. And when we bring people together, that's how things get accomplished at the local level. And I would just say that if we can be mindful of those, we also will address some of the bigger issues that are way above our mayor pay scale. But by working together, solutions get done. And that's what I think that the Ability Center has helped contribute to by making us aware of issues and then working with us to find solutions. And that's exactly the job description for a mayor. So I want to thank the Ability Center for hosting this event, but also just being part of the community, because Northwest Ohio is better because of it.
Good words, Tom. Bring the community together. I really like the way you put that in your message. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of good stuff has already been said. So perhaps just add that, I think in some sense as mayors, we try with whatever sort of authority we have under statute in our city charters and so forth, we try to, our job's really, to run the city in some sense. But, frequently I think how mayors really change the dynamic of the municipality they work in is by being really in touch with their constituent concerns and understanding, and accessibility needs are no different, understanding the needs of people in your community and bringing that to the forefront, as we've discussed, in the goals when you establish projects and in the planning phases, and in those, I guess, processes. And so that's why I think maybe the biggest thing is, and I think it's important, right? Somehow, which, perhaps due to elected office, mayors, I think, become a little bit, hopefully within our pay grade, cultural leaders. And then I think it's important that we occasionally, when it's appropriate and proper, come out and say, I lead this village of Oak Harbor or a municipality, and accessibility is important to me, and I'm working to make sure that, this is a town that's accessible for everyone. And I think that's important, to make sure everyone is aware and that this is an important public issue and that this is something we hold dear to us.
Thank you again to everyone for being here. And I know I speak on behalf of the Ability Center when I say I hope we're able to continue to collaborate on these sorts of projects in the future. And I look forward to seeing you all fairly soon in some of those projects. But it was great to hear from you, and I thank you again for being here. This video
Katie,
is, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean, are you going to post it so we can distribute? I think that's a good way to get more information out.
Yep, that's where I was headed next. So the video is being recorded as well as broadcasted on Facebook Live. So anybody who signed up and registered for the Zoom webinar will get a copy of it. It is also available on our website. And if there's any other fancy technological things that need to be done to share this video, I would refer you to our wonderful marketing PR manager, and I will get you connected to her. But the video is being recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered, as well as available on our website. So thanks again. I hope this was informational for everybody who got involved.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.